on this story, Principal Partner, Nextier Advisory, Patrick Okigbo, joins me from our Abuja studios. Good to have you, Patrick, and good morning. First, what is the link between Nigeria's power sector and the African Free Trade Agreement?
Well, thank you for having me. Being part of the Free Trade Agreement means that Nigeria has joined a much wider market, that we're no longer playing just within the Nigerian market, but that we're playing within the broader African continent. It means that the generation, power generation that happens in Nigeria has to be delivered into the larger Africa pool. So that kind of changes the dynamics on how the power sector is expected to fare going forward.
Very good, Patrick. Now, how does this initiative benefit Nigeria's power sector in terms of competitiveness on an industrial scale?
Well, I mean, all the advantages of a single market should come to play within the Nigeria market. You know, so being part of this larger market means that power players now have access to a much larger market. They should have take advantage of the economies of scale that provides. It should force our local companies to play at a much greater scale of efficiency. So if you look at all of those, it should bode well for the industry. But it also depends on how industry players prepare for the increased competition which is going to be brought to bear. So some of the inefficiencies that we've had to live under, we can't continue to live under those inefficiencies because we're now tied to certain agreements that are continent-wide, certain levels of performance that cannot sustain when there are countries that are dependent on us to produce power and supply into a pool or to make payments when power is delivered to us, etc. So it forces Nigerian power sector businesses to play at a much higher level of efficiency, which at the moment I'm not sure if we're ready for.
Indeed, Patrick, still talking about inefficiencies, concerns have been raised on poor regulations in Nigeria's power sector. What are your thoughts regarding this free trade arrangement?
Well, I mean, it would be kind of unfair to put the blame squarely on regulation. There are big regulatory challenges we face, but the problem is that the power sector is broken in many parts. It's broken at the generation end of things. The distribution companies have not performed at the level that was expected at the point of privatization. Similarly, Transmission Company of Nigeria still faces some significant structural challenges, although we've seen some significant improvements under the current leadership. So it's not purely a regulatory challenge. However, having to play within a much broader continent-wide market forces us to very quickly deal with all of the regulatory challenges we have, where we have Nigeria Electricity Regulatory Commission that has not quite stepped up to its responsibility of being the regulator for our market, and it's now expected to play at a continent level where there are countries that are at a higher level of efficiency. So it'll really make demands on all market players to play at a much higher level of efficiency.
All right, Patrick. Now, there are current power pacts between Nigeria, Benin, and Niger republics. How will this impact on the African Free Trade Area Agreement?
I mean, we have agreements to supply power to these countries because we had to dam the Niger at Kainji to produce power, which means that we have an obligation to supply power to these countries. I think at the moment we supply right about 800 megawatts. That's going to grow, especially as we are, first of all, within the West Africa power pool, and we have expectations at that level. By the time we join a much larger Africa-wide continental market, we'll have other responsibilities. Maybe not at the bilateral level, where we have commitments to supply power to countries, but we might have, the local companies might have contracts to supply power to other companies within the Africa market. That would have huge implications both on the positive and the negative side. So on the positive side, for instance, Today in the market, we have stranded generation of about 2,000 megawatts. Now, that's huge when you compare that to the fact that we supply just about 4,000 megawatts.
Very good. Now, let's take a look at the prospect for power importation into Nigeria under this agreement. Yes, we have some shortcomings as well in our ability to provide, power to every home. So what do you make of that development?
Well, I mean, being part of the free trade agreement means that we can import power from other African countries. So ultimately, we should be able to do that, but right now we can't. The reason being that today we have stranded generation. We can generate way more than we're supplying to the homes. We cannot supply because of infrastructure challenges. So if we were to import power from other countries, we'll still have a problem with transmitting and distributing it to homes. But ultimately, that's the advantage we should see for being part of this agreement.
Still talking about this structural deficiency, how would you assess Nigeria's power sector in the last 4 years, realistically?
Well, I mean, it's been terrible. If you consider that what we've been able to deliver to homes is still hovering around 3,500 to 4,000 megawatts. And there are reasons for this. One of the bigger reasons is the financial challenge that we have in the sector, driven mainly because of the tariffs. The tariff is not at the right point. It's not at the right point because government has not reviewed, and because of all the parameters that go into determining the tariff, the key one being exchange rate. There are also other issues around marketing discipline, around the different players in the market, and so on and so forth. So we perform badly. We've been talking about what needs to be done. Government is beginning to appear to deal with some of these issues. We're hopeful that in the new administration that we should see more progress. But more importantly, being part of this free trade agreement means that it will force Nigeria to perform at a much higher level, and some of the indiscipline we've seen in the market, should leave the market if we must be part of this agreement.
At a higher level, there's a lot of bureaucracy when it comes to the power sector in Nigeria. So how do you see this realistically playing out within the free trade agreement?
Well, I mean, the bureaucracy, you could say it's in the part of the sector that's still owned by government, which is transmission. But I wouldn't even say that that's the bigger problem. The bigger problem is lack of planning in the industry, the design of the market that we operate in, marketing discipline, where no one is held to account, the challenges with power tariff, which is driven by the broader macroeconomic indices, and the political considerations that come into what we do with all of these. Then we can play in the new, larger continental market. If we don't deal with it, then we're going to go into defaults that would ultimately lead to worse performance for the sector. So in a nutshell, it's a great opportunity for the sector because it's going to force all of us to perform at a much higher level of efficiency.
Very good. Patrick Okigbo, I'd like to thank you very much for your thoughts on Nigeria's power sector regarding the African Free Trade Agreements. Good to have you.